Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to day 2 of WGL Stride application. Before we go on the record this morning, I wanted to elaborate on a point that I made yesterday regarding cross-examination. And that is, cross-examination here will not be used as a substitute for discovery. Questions that begin with "I'm curious to know" posed to the witness are not appropriate in this matter. This matter is a trial-type evidentiary hearing, and by its nature, it is an adversarial process. So any of those types of questions should have been conducted through the discovery phase of the proceeding. When we have witnesses on cross, the purpose is to test their credibility, to elicit facts that are favorable to your side. In addition, friendly cross-examination will not be permitted of a witness. Commissioners, of course, have the prerogative to ask questions of the witnesses, as we did yesterday. But this is something that I'll be mindful of keeping going forward today. However, noting that we're in the middle of a hearing, and I allowed a lot of general knowledge questions to be asked of witnesses yesterday, I don't think it'd be fair for me to impose that for the remainder of the trial today. That being said, I'd ask you to be mindful of the proper use of cross-examination going forward. That being said, anything we need to discuss off the record? No? Okay. Good morning. This hearing will come to order in the matter of the application of Washington Gas Light Company for approval of a new STRIDE plan and accompanying cost recovery mechanism in case number 9486. If memory serves me correctly, the utilities sponsored witnesses have concluded their testimony, and will proceed today with Office of People's Counsel. Mr. Cleaver, is your witness available?
Yes, he is, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Joseph Cleaver on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel. The Office of People's Counsel calls Brendan Larkin Connolly to the stand.
Good morning, Mr. Larkin Connolly. If you could just remain standing for a moment.
I do.
Good morning, Mr. Larkin Connolly. Would you kindly state your name for the record?
Brendan Larkin Connolly.
And would you please state the name of your business and its address and location?
Yes, I'm a principal at DH Infrastructure. It's located at 9 1/2 Market Street, Northampton, Massachusetts, 01060.
And what is your position at DH Infrastructure?
Principal.
Thank you. Mr. Larkin Connolly, do you have before you a document entitled Direct Testimony of Brendan Larkin Connolly, Public Version, which was filed in this case on August 17th, 2018?
I do, yes.
And does that document include 36 pages of narrative testimony, your curriculum vitae labeled attachment BLC1, and 6 data responses by the company to data requests?
Yes, it does.
Mr. Larkin Connolly, if you have before you a document entitled Direct Testimony of Brendan Larkin Connolly, Confidential Version, which was filed in this case on August 17th, 2018.
Yes, I do.
And does that document include 36 pages of narrative testimony, your curriculum vitae labeled attachment BLC1, and 7 data responses by the company to data requests?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, I would like to have Mr. Larkin Connolly's pre-filed direct testimonies marked for identification as OPC Exhibits 10 and 10C.
So noted, exhibits are labeled 10 and 10C for the confidential direct testimony submission.
Thank you. Mr. Larkin Connolly, do you have before you a document entitled Rebuttal Testimony of Brendan Larkin Connolly, filed in this case on September 5th, 2018, which consists of 11 pages of narrative testimony?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, I would like to have Mr. Larkin Connolly's pre-filed rebuttal testimony marked for identification as OPC Exhibit 11.
So marked.
Mr. Larkin Connolly, do you have before you a document entitled Updated Surrebuttal Testimony of Brendan Larkin Connolly, filed in this case on September 18th, 2018, which consists of 19 pages of narrative testimony, attachment BLC2, and 2 data responses by the company to data requests?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, I would like to have Mr. Larkin Connolly's pre-filed updated surrebuttal testimony marked for identification as OPC Exhibit 12.
So marked.
Mr. Larkin Connolly, were all of these documents before you prepared by you or under your supervision and direction?
Yes, they were.
Do you have any corrections or deletions to make to your respective testimonies at this time?
I have 2 changes to make.
Okay. What is the first change?
The first change would be on both the public and the confidential versions of my initial testimony on page 7.
Okay, go ahead.
On page 7, there's table 1, and in the bottom, in the notes section of the table, I had left a reference on incomplete. It's right now it reads spend by program from exhibit MAH, and then there's 2 question marks. It should actually read spend by program from appendix A to exhibit MAH-1 in the company's case 9335 initial filing.
Thank you. And what is the second correction that you have to make to your testimonies?
The second correction is on page 10 of my rebuttal testimony.
Okay, go ahead.
And on the, again, another table 1, at the bottom where it says dollar gouge line, instead of program 5B, it should actually have read 5C.
Thank you. Mr. Larkin Connolly, if you were asked the same questions today under oath as were posed in your pre-filed testimonies, would your answers be the same?
They would.
For these reasons, do you adopt these direct, rebuttal, and surrebuttal testimonies respectively as your sworn testimony in this matter?
I do.
Your Honor, I move that OPC exhibit numbers 10, 10C, 11, and 12 be admitted into evidence.
Seeing no objection, OPC's exhibits 10, 10C, 11, and 12 are accepted into evidence.
Thank you. Your Honor, the witness is now available for cross-examination.
Thank you. Mr. Dodge, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Larkin Connolly. My name is John Dodge. I work for Washington Gas. I'll be spending some time with you this morning. But first, on behalf of all of the sad baseball fans in Baltimore and Washington, I want to congratulate your Red Sox on clinching a playoff spot.
Thank you. We'll see how the postseason goes.
Mr. Larkin Connolly, you were educated as an economist and you have worked as a rate specialist. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And your work experience also includes review of accelerated gas infrastructure projects in Massachusetts.
That's right.
And from reviewing your impressive resume, I would say you have significant experience in reviewing these types of projects. Would you agree?
Relatively, yes.
You have not been trained as an engineer, and you do not hold yourself out as an engineer. Thank you.
No, I do not.
Thank you. As someone with significant experience in this area, do you consider yourself familiar with the typical terminology, the construction terms and definitions that are used in the course of an accelerated replacement program?
I'd say I have a reasonable familiarity with those terms, yes.
Thank you. Are you familiar with, or generally familiar with, the so-called alliance contracts that Washington Gas enters into with its stride contractors?
I'm not familiar with the term alliance, but maybe if you sort of describe
Sure.
the definition of,
Well,
what they use the term,
That's
different
fair,
utilities.
Fair
maybe.
enough, fair
Yeah.
enough. At a very high level, can we agree that Washington Gas hires contractors to remove at-risk pipe and install new pipe? Can we agree on that?
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Washington Gas also tasks its stride contractors with a few other obligations dealing with what your counsel yesterday called jurisdictional issues, such as permitting, paving, and restoration. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that's
So, essentially, boiling all this down, Washington Gas buys the pipe and manages the overall program, and the stride contractor installs the pipe and manages the local installation process. Would you agree with that characterization?
yes, that sounds correct.
Thank you. Were you able to tune into yesterday's hearing?
Yes, I watched all of it. It cut out a couple times, but I
How
saw the
did we
majority.
look? Did we look okay?
Everybody looked
Good, good, very good.
spot on. Yeah.
I'd like to focus on some of the basic themes and issues that have arisen during the case and that were discussed in yesterday's hearing.
Sure.
One of the principal issues, as I'm sure you know, is that of Washington Gas's proposal to include a contingency in the cost estimate of each project. Do you agree with that is a principal issue in this case?
Yes, I heard that discussed multiple times yesterday.
And you have opposed the company's proposal to build the contingency into its estimated project costs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'd like to start with this basic question, sir. As you understand the company's proposal, is the proposed contingency an actual cost or is it an estimated cost?
As proposed, I think it's sort of it's an additive cost to the estimated budget cost, so I would call it an estimated cost, yes.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the phrase direct costs in the context of gas infrastructure replacement programs?
I think it would help maybe if you provide some context for
Sure,
how you're...
I'll try to give you some examples. Harking back to what the contractor does and what Washington Gas does on a particular STRIDE project, would the direct costs include things like the installation costs that the contractor bills to Washington Gas and the jurisdictional costs that the contractor absorbs and passes through its contract to Washington Gas? Would you agree with that?
Yes, that sounds correct.
Thank you. Now let's turn to the specific contingency factor proposed by Washington Gas. If you want to turn to page 12 of your SIR rebuttal testimony at lines 3 and 4. And there you state, and correct me if I read this incorrectly, the contingency therefore is a straight 20% markup on all project budgets. Did I read that correctly?
That's correct.
And you don't change your conclusion in your revised SIR rebuttal testimony with respect to that point, do you?
No, I do not. No.
Thank you. May I approach, Your Honor? I have a exhibit to hand out.
You may.
Mr. Larkin Connolly, I've passed to you and the bench what has been preliminarily marked as Washington Gas Exhibit number 12. Do you have that in hand?
I do, yes.
And could you confirm for me that it's a cover sheet dated July 30th and the attachment is the response of Washington Gas to a staff data request in this proceeding, question number 2-5? Do you see those?
Yes, that's correct.
And just for clarification purposes, although the response is dated July 24th, the letter appears that it was served on the parties on July 30th. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I see that.
Thank you very much. Your Honor, Washington Gas would ask that this document be preliminarily marked as Washington Gas Exhibit number 12.
So marked.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Larkin Connolly, have you seen this document before?
Yes, I have.
You read it in the preparation of your positions in this case, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And this document, by my calculation, was provided to all the parties before they, and you in particular, filed your direct rebuttal, SIR rebuttal, or revised SIR rebuttal testimonies. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. And can we agree that the question and response pertain to the company's proposed contingency in this matter?
Yes, I believe that's accurate.
The response, which is the company's explanation of how it calculates the proposed contingency, would that be something that you, as an expert in this case, would consider informing your opinion regarding the proposed contingency?
Yes, I remember this is one of the responses that I used as reference to understand how the company was going to, what they were proposing in terms of the contingency.
So you would look to this to ultimately determine whether you think the proposal is reasonable or necessary?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. Let's go through the precise language of the response, please. And I apologize for the print quality of the response. I think we can make it through, though. The response first establishes the percentage of the contingency. Is that correct?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. The first line says the company's cost estimates include a 20% contingency. Do you
That-
agree with that?
That's right, yes.
So that establishes the percentage of the contingency.
That's correct.
Next, the response states that the 20% contingency, and I hope I'm quoting correctly, is applied to the sum of the pricing contractor estimate. Do you see that?
I see that, yes.
Thank you. What do you understand the sum of the pricing contractor estimate to include?
I'm sorry, if I may object, only on the basis that it appears that counsel is not stating what this response says. It looks like it says piping contractor, not pricing.
I apologize. If I said pricing, I meant piping. I will reform the question. Does the sentence read, the percentage is applied to the sum of the piping contractor estimate?
I assume that meant the estimate for the project, the contractor estimate for the specific BCA.
Thank you. We'll get there in a moment, but just to make sure I've read it correctly, it's the piping contractor cost estimate. Do you equate the entire project budget that you referenced in your SIR rebuttal testimony to be the piping contractor cost estimate?
I believe it was my thought that was the piping contractor estimate was the majority of the project estimate.
Okay,
Yes.
we'll get to the percentages too, but let's do a little level setting here. Does the typical gas infrastructure contractor estimate, in your expert opinion, include materials?
Without in terms of I'm not sure how the contractors here submit their estimates, so I wouldn't be able to.
We can go back on and have our transcriptionist read your prior answer, but I believe you agreed with me that when I said that Washington Gas buys the pipe and pays the contractor to install it. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
So the pricing contractor cost estimate of necessity does not include pipe. Is that correct?
Based off of the discussion that we had today, yes.
Thank you. Does the typical gas infrastructure contractor estimate include company overheads, say construction overheads or corporate overheads?
I don't recall you mentioning overheads in our earlier conversation, but
I did not, but I'm asking you now. Do you believe that the piping contractor cost estimate includes company overheads?
based on my experience in other jurisdictions, that would be separate from the contractor estimates.
Thank you. Can we agree that the phrase piping contractor estimate includes what are termed direct charges only in accelerated replacement parlance?
I guess what do you mean by direct charges?
You don't know what direct charges mean?
Are you just maybe direct?
I'm asking a simple question. Do you know what the phrase direct charges means in accelerated construction parlance?
I guess I would need more context to understand. Do you mean in terms of just direct? Are we again referencing direct cost that we discussed before? Or?
I'm just looking for a yes or no answer, whether you understand what the term direct charges means.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. If there's a specific place in the record that counsel is referring to that he wants to ask the witness about, he can do that, but I don't think the witness is understanding the question, and it's been asked and answered now several times.
Mr. Dodge, could you put a finer point on this, or are you asking the witness generally of his understanding of the term direct costs?
I'd like to start with his general knowledge of the question, and then, depending on the answer, proceed. This is classic impeachment cross-examination, Your Honor.
I appreciate the leading questions. Yes, start with that question again, and if he doesn't know the answer, the witness should respond no, and then we'll move on.
Sure. In fact, I'll rephrase it if it makes it
Sure.
easier for you, sir. Can you provide us a definition of the phrase direct charges in construction parlance?
I can try. I can try to provide a.
Have at it, please.
Let's
Well-
hear your understanding of that term, and if you cannot answer the question, it's fine to say you can't.
Sure. I mean, actually, I'd rather not just sort of give a definition just based on off of speculation. I mean, if before when we were talking about direct costs, I would think in this sense, if we were talking about contractor estimates, it'd be the direct costs that the contractor charges to the utility in terms of labor and the expenses incurred by the contractors.
Thank you. That's sufficient for my purposes, Your Honor. Thank you for that assistance. So again, the contractor costs, forgive me, would include the installation costs and the jurisdictional costs, paving, permitting, restoration, those sorts of costs. Is that correct?
And probably police detail, yes.
Thank you. So let's go back to the company's response to staff data request 2-5. Based on our colloquy, would you agree that the 20% percentage, the contingency percentage, applies only to the contractor costs that are billed to Washington Gas?
As it's written in this response, that I would agree with that.
Thank you. So if we have agreed that the 20% contingency applies to contractor costs, that means by necessity that the factor is not applied to materials, that is pipe, as we previously discussed, or overheads. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Thank you. Mr. Larkin Connolly, in your experience, what percentage of a typical project estimate in an accelerated gas pipeline replacement program is represented by contractor costs?
I wouldn't be able to give you a number off the top of my head.
You don't have any experience in what the breakdown is between contractor costs and company costs?
I would say, based off of my experience, the majority of the cost would be the contractor and permitting cost.
Would you accept, subject to check, that the typical percentage for Washington Gas is 60%?
For 60% contractor, 40% company?
Correct.
I'd accept that, yes.
Thank you. Now, Commissioner Herman knows all too well about my lawyer math, but bear with me here for a moment. Am I correct that if we apply a 20% contingency factor to 60% of a project estimate, that's the same as applying a 12% contingency factor to 100% of a project estimate? 20% of 60 is 12%.
I agree with the math, yes.
Thank you. So when the parties and the commission have been considering the company's proposal for a 20% contingency factor for Stride 2, in reality, what we're talking about is a 12% contingency factor for overall project costs. Is that correct?
I mean, so this is new information that you're presenting me here today. I think this is not how the company has presented it throughout the proceeding, but based off the discussion that we've had today, I agree.
You did read the response to 2-5 before submitting any of your testimonies?
I have read it, yes.
Thank you. Let's move on to one of the other themes in the case. Mr. Larkin Connolly, what is your position on the other cost estimation enhancements proposed by the company? That is, inflation and more discrete pipe estimates.
I agreed with the adoption of using inflation for the adjustments, yes.
And do you think they will improve the cost estimation process?
That's, well, compared to Stride 1, if inflation wasn't accounted for, then that should be an improvement, yes.
Let's go back to page 12 of your SIR rebuttal at line 4. Let me know when you're there, please.
I'm there, yes.
Am I correct that you expressed a concern that a contingency might diminish reporting requirements regarding cost variances?
I'd agree. That was part of my concern.
Has the company proposed to change any cost variance reporting from Stride 1?
They have not, no.
If the commission orders the company to report, or Washington Gas agrees to report in Stride 2, cost variances for, say, all sizes of projects, any variance, would that alleviate your concern?
Can you repeat the question? Yes.
Sure. Right now, under Stride 1, there are certain triggers for the company to report and describe certain levels of cost variances, correct?
That's right, yes.
If the commission ordered the company to report on all cost variances in Stride 2, would that alleviate the concern that you mentioned in your SIR rebuttal testimony?
It wouldn't change, because it wouldn't change my concern about the adoption of the contingency within the budget estimates and how they are fed into the Stride surcharge in the beginning. That's sort of one of my primary concerns. In terms of reporting, one of my concerns was if there's a contingency applied to the budget, it sort of, in some way, the company can sort of argue any variance that falls within here fits within sort of this contingency that's already established. And so whether all the variances are required, it might sort of, for those who are doing the review, they might look past some of the variances because there's this sort of contingency already established.
So from that, do I take it you don't have confidence in the commission to look to those numbers and see what's really going on?
No, I'm speaking to actually my own experience when I worked for the Department of Public Utilities. One of the main approaches that we used when we sat down and we looked at projects was the company's policies in place for how they dealt with project variances. And so, and what we looked for was that they followed the procedures in place, and if a variance occurred, if there were certain measures that need to be taken to sort of address that variance, or here what I've approved is that there should be sort of different steps taken, that there should be management approval if a variance takes place. That's documentation that we use to sort of understand what happened. My concern here is with the contingency, there is no sort of management steps that can be reviewed. So there's a policy in place that, yes, there's a certain level of acceptable range, but there's sort of no record showing what the procedures are in place to sort of account for the variances.
Can you point me to any company testimony or data response where it says the company is proposing to change its field level management of cost variances?
That's not necessarily the point that I was making, that they're making changes on the ground at the project sites. This would be more in-house management.
Who manages at the project site? Does the company have field representatives out on projects looking at cost overruns in your parlance?
It's my understanding that the companies would have representatives there checking.
And is it also your understanding that the company signs off on any cost variance at the field level before the work is completed?
I would assume, yes, that's the case.
So I'm curious, Mr. Larkin Connolly, has the company proposed in this Stride 2 proceeding any change to that process?
No, they haven't. I would have liked to have seen a change, and when in the case here, if there's if a variance has exceeded a certain level, so you're saying 12% of the project, if that's the point, or 10%, mostly I've seen 10%, if that variance level has gone past there would be some sort of documentation within the a sort of project reapproval of the budget. And right now, from what you're telling me, maybe there's a project manager on site who's approving this, but there is no sort of formal documentation of that process.
Well, I apologize if I've been trying to tell you anything. I've been trying to elicit your knowledge of our process. Do you have any knowledge of the management process that the company uses to manage cost variances, starting at the field level and going to the back office?
I had asked for those for the discovery. They said they didn't have. There was no formal policy in place.
So your presumption is that the company is not proposing a change in not doing anything, essentially.
Maybe rephrase that
Sure.
question.
You seem to be relying on the fact that somebody said we don't have a formal process. And as I recall that data response, and I don't want to put your words in your mouth, I don't think it said quite what you said, but I want to understand what you thought it meant. You're relying on the absence of information to conclude that the company will not be changing in Stride 2.
Are you suggesting that there is a change that hasn't been notified, or I'm...
Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to answer
Okay.
questions. If you
It was my understanding that there is no change in the beyond the contingency factor here. There is no change in sort of the variance approval process related to that contingency.
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Larkin Connery, are you aware that OPC has consistently criticized Washington Gas during Stride 1 for underestimating its project costs?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
I believe if you turn to page 10, lines 1 to 4 of your SIR rebuttal, I want to make sure I have the right testimony set. Maybe your rebuttal. Bench's
Sure.
indulgence, please. My apologies. You have
initial.
your rebuttal testimony with you, sir. Again, page 10, lines 1 to 4.
Of which version? The rebuttal?
The rebuttal. Are you there?
Yes.
The first full sentence, starting on line 1, you express a concern that the company's Stride 2 budget is overstated because the company incorrectly applied the 3% inflation factor to 2019 estimates, and those estimates had been calculated in 2019 dollars. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Earlier I asked you whether you had listened to yesterday's hearing, and you indicated that you had, at least in part.
I did, yes.
Did you hear company witness Akas explain that he used 2018 dollars to estimate the 2019 project list and grossed up that amount by 3% for inflation?
Yes, I heard him make those corrections. It's not what is in the exhibit as $2019. Yes.
And do you have any reason to doubt Mr. Akas's change on the stand yesterday?
No, I do not.
Assuming that Mr. Akas calculated the 2019 unit cost and grossed up 2018 dollars, that would mean that he and staff did not overstate the company's unit costs for 2019. Is that correct?
Based on the corrections yesterday, yes.
Thank you. Now, if you could turn to your revised SIR rebuttal. And I would ask you to look at page 11. starting at line 15, please.
I'm there.
The sentence that starts on line 15 says, my proposed budget of $297.7 million is 3% less than Mr. Akas's estimate of $306.7 million. Did I read that correctly?
That's correct, yes.
Does your estimate include any new upfront or scoping costs that you have recommended in this case?
No, it does not.
All right, thank you.
I haven't recommended any scope
You
changes.
mentioned some new project cost techniques. Is that correct?
In terms of project management?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
And you didn't associate any costs with those recommendations with your budget. Is that correct?
I did not know.
Thank you. Looking back at that particular sentence, am I correct that you reduced the entire budget by 3% to offset your belief that 2019 unit costs used 2019 dollars and then were grossed up again?
That's correct, yes.
And I think we've agreed now that it would be appropriate to reduce the 2019 unit cost by 3% to reflect what you call Mr. Akas's corrections. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
All right. And that would take us roughly back up to the $306 or $307 million that Mr. Akas has in his testimony.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. All right, let's stick with, and it may be in this version of your SIR rebuttal too. Let me just double check on page 7. Yes, we can stick with this one. Page 7, lines 5 through 8. And there you reiterate your position regarding proposed transmission program 5, and you don't think that program qualifies as an infrastructure addition under the STRIDE statute. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it accurate, Mr. Larkin Connolly, to say that you believe only eligible infrastructure itself qualifies for accelerated cost recovery under STRIDE? That is the actual plant deployed.
That only. Maybe rephrase the question.
Sure. When we send out a contractor, the contractor takes out pipe and puts in pipe. I'm interested in your opinion on what qualifies for accelerated cost recovery under STRIDE. Is it just the cost of that pipe? The pipe that is replaced?
No, it would be the cost of the labor related to installing the pipe and other related costs to it, yes.
So your proposed budget includes more than just the actual plant installed. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
One last question, Mr. Larkin Connolly, and it doesn't have to do with the Red Sox, I promise. Do you believe the Commission should add words to the STRIDE statute when it considers the parties' arguments on proposed transmission program 5?
Objection. This calls for legal conclusion and it's speculative.
Sustained.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Dean.
Staff has no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any redirect, Mr. Claver?
Very briefly, Your Honor. Thank you. Mr. Larkin Connolly, in response to a question from Mr. Dodge, you referred to a data response in which the company described its procedures for variances or lack thereof. If you turn to your updated SIR rebuttal testimony, at the end you attach 2 data responses. Is the first response attached there, which is the company response to OPCDR 323, is that the response you were referring to?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Do the commissioners have any questions of the witness? Commissioner Herman.
Good morning, Mr. Larkin Connolly.
Good morning, Commissioner.
What's the difference between the 2 SIR rebuttals?
The only difference, there was a a response from the company that I had been waiting for that came a day late. So the addition, I added a budget, my estimate of the proposed budget into the updated SIR rebuttal.
Okay.
So that's it's only the addition of the budget is the only change.
Okay, thank you. So you're suggesting that no contingency be added, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And are you also suggesting that no inflation be added?
No, I believe inflation is correct to add.
So
The only issue with inflation that had gone on is that in the company's original plan for distribution plan that they submitted, in the tables where it has the unit cost, it says $2019. And then when I looked at the unit cost for how they came up with the plans, it was that $2019 increased by 3%. So I was saying that they were sort of applying inflation to something that had already been inflated.
And we've resolved that.
We've resolved that's been
Okay.
corrected. Yeah.
Right, okay. So you're good with you think a 3% inflation factor is correct?
It's reasonable,
now that we've
yes.
resolved the issue. But that no contingency is correct.
That's right.
Wouldn't it be standard in any kind of a construction contract to have some contingency built in?
I think there's always going to be expectation. Any budget forecast or estimate, it's sort of wrong from the moment you make it. So there's going to be some variance when you make an estimate. My concern with this proposal for the contingency is that it's when the company comes in for their in November of each year and propose the stride factor or the stride rider for the next year, that contingency is going to be built in to their budget. So customers are going to be paying not only the estimates but this contingency factor from the beginning, before the commission has had a chance to understand sort of what are the actual factors that led to some of these project cost variances.
But as you discussed with Mr. Dodge, the commission always has done an after-the-fact review of these expenditures, and this proposal doesn't change anything with respect to that review, does it?
That's right. That same process would take place, but it could also happen in sort of the opposite, in reverse, where if you're just basing the rider on the budgets, then when they come in for the reconciliation, if there's projects that have sort of gone outside that estimate, the project costs would be reconciled at that point. So any cost variances would be sort of reintroduced into the rider in that way. So instead of customers sort of paying for these variances through the stride year, that would be reconciling afterwards once they've been able to be reviewed.
Right. So are you aware of, you said you had some familiarity with programs in Massachusetts that are similar in nature?
Yeah, that's right. I've worked with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office on their it's called the GSEP program. So I've done that for 3 years.
Okay, and is there a contingency factor built into their estimates for this type of program?
No, that's one of the reasons I made my proposal here. I haven't seen a contingency like this applied to the project budgets from the beginning. I'd say the majority of the utilities that I look at there have some sort of variance program in place where typically it's 10% or $50,000. If a project goes over that amount, they require reapproval from somebody within the internal management. So a project manager would need to get reapproval for the budget if it goes over a certain level. So when I look through the documentation provided through the reconciliation filings in Massachusetts, there's a submission of a budget report where it shows the initial budget, then the new budget when a project has sort of gone outside of its variance, and then I can think of like National Grid, for example. They provide a variance explanation report that sort of explains why the variance went over due to paving or police details or other various costs. And so that's all done through the reconciliation process. So then if the company's initial budgets were, if their costs, when you add everything up, sort of went 5% over, then that's included in the reconciliation factor, but not in the initial estimates.
Okay, thanks. Did you review any of the other programs in Maryland to see whether a contingency factor was added in those?
Yes, I was the OPC's witness for both BGE and Columbia's Stride 2 programs, and neither of them proposed to have a contingency factor in their programs.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. You also suggested that the new transmission program 5, shouldn't be included because it doesn't meet the definition of stride. Are you aware of any other infrastructure program in another state that might include something like that program?
I don't know one off the top of my head. I'm sure if there was a program in place that was promoting this sort of making pipes piggable, then I could see that being in there.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't. There isn't anything like this in any of the Massachusetts programs. It's the GSET program in Massachusetts is very similar to the Stride program, where it's sort of specifically going after the replacement of leak-prone materials.
Okay. So would you say that your review, you're familiar with Maryland and Massachusetts? Are you familiar with, say, Pennsylvania or any of the other states' plans that have similar plans to Stride?
I haven't looked specifically at their programs now.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Larkin Connolly, I want to go back to DR 3-23 and your updated SIR rebuttal that your counsel asked you about. Is it your opinion that the company's response says, and I want to understand how you view the company's response here. Well, first let me ask you this. Did you happen to listen to my exchange with Mr. Walsh yesterday in this area?
I did, yes.
With regard to how you put kind of constrictions in to ensure that these contingencies aren't abused as a pad or as something else.
I remember a bit of it. Did cut out briefly during your conversation with him, but
hard to believe.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. I want to understand your opinion of the company's response to this DR. Does that essentially say that field oversight personnel or project management oversight personnel have broad discretion to utilize that 20% contingency as they see fit in the carrying out of these projects?
That's how I understood it to be. That it's more of a lot of the decisions on project variation and cost changes. Those decisions are being made sort of on the ground by the project manager.
And doesn't that, without standards as to what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, without some procedure or formal process, you introduce a wide degree of variability between projects over the course of the Stride implementation. Isn't that at least possible, that these things could have a broad range of applications? Maybe some are appropriate, maybe some are not, but how do you know?
I agree. I mean, that's sort of the crux of the difficulty of the regulatory process of trying to sort of understand which variation is acceptable and which isn't.
And isn't this situation a little different than typical construction situation because the recovery mechanism is in advance?
That's right.
So that's the difference between a normal contingency and a construction. There's an opportunity later to get those contingencies realized, but here up front, when you put them in advance in the collection mechanism, the recovery mechanism is in advance. It's a very different ballgame in terms of estimations, is it not?
Right. And I think, I mean, from an accounting or budgeting perspective, if the company feels they need to set a certain amount of funds aside for contingency, I guess that might make sense. What doesn't seem to make sense is that customers are sort of fronting this contingency amount, especially when we're saying when it's applied to every project. And one thing you would think, if you're basing your project cost on sort of an average project, yes, there are going to be some outliers, but you would expect that most projects are going to be happening, you know, 0, 5, 6% above or below, and that's sort of from the other in Massachusetts. When I've done these filings, most of the time, when you add up all the project cost variance, it's much less than 10%, typically around maybe 3 to 5%.
And if there were company procedures and processes in this area, and they were very tightly and narrowly drawn, very constricted, might that mitigate some of your concern in this area?
I think if they had procedures in place, so what I appreciate when I see a sort of a company variance policy in place is, so you have the project manager on the ground, and maybe they recognize, oh, the scope of this project's going to have to change, or we've hit some ledge and we're gonna have to spend 5 more days here and more police details, and sort of the scope's going to change. So that then they would have to go to sort of somebody, their administrator or somebody higher up in the company, to get reapproval. And so if they came to you right now, and that you'd sort of have documentation to see, oh, there was this internal communication going on, that not just the person on the ground, but there was communication going on, that the project was having troubles.
Yeah. Well, the response says that the oversight would only pay for activities that are necessary and appropriate to complete the project in compliance with all applicable requirements. But that has a broad.
That's very broad. Yes.
One person's necessity is another person's waste.
Right. Exactly. It's difficult to sort of, without sort of having those more strict guidelines in there. It's tough to understand. You know.
The witness should wait for a question before answering.
Sure.
I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Richard.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here today. Just following up on some of the questions that the company asked. From the exchange, so do I understand that now that you understand that it's only being applied, the contingency applied to the contractor cost, does that change your perspective at all? That maybe overall, as it was put, it's 12% and not 20%. I just want to understand where you stand now after that exchange.
No, I think my opinion's still
Okay.
still the same. It's because
Okay.
the same process is still
Okay,
going.
and it was brought up, I guess, in a question that was just left hanging, that OPC in the past has complained about the inability of the company to have accurate cost estimates. Do you think tacking on this contingency fee would that satisfy, I guess, that concern that OPC has raised in the past?
I think then you still have the question of why are the budget estimates off? Why do you need to add this contingency factor to it?
Okay, and then just looking at your, I guess page 14 of your SIR rebuttal, you talk about, I guess, an alternative approach, and you talk about, I'm suggesting, I guess it's number 8, I'm suggesting company consider installing internal steps to address cost variances through project lifestyle and life cycle. Are you familiar with some of the suggestions that commission staff have made as far as reporting metrics? Are you?
I've reviewed that through their testimony. Yes.
Would any of those additional metrics help get some of this information to go with the recommendation you're talking about as an alternative to contingency cost?
I think some of those metrics might help in the review process. My specific recommendation here is more in the response to the company was saying this contingency factor is needed more to sort of make project management more efficient, and so I was looking for something more internal, not just in the regulatory process, but through their own internal procedures.
Okay, and that's what I took from your recommendation here. if the company knows that they have these additional staff metrics, that they're going to have to report, does that begin to influence their internal procedures to provide some of the I guess, the information concerns about the accuracy, I guess, or the preciseness of the project estimates?
I guess. Well, I guess it wouldn't hurt. I don't.
Okay. I'm just trying to.
Yeah.
If we do, looking at what you've provided in your testimony as far as alternatives to try to make sure that again, the company does provide useful information and does look at precision between the staff and trying to understand what you're recommending. Does that provide a viable alternative? I mean, how much in addition to what staff is suggesting would be needed to
Right.
again adopt your recommendation?
My recommendation is based off of every. I was actually quite surprised when I got that data response that they're saying they don't have a policy in place. That's something, in at least every company I've looked at, there's some sort of policy in place where once a budget sort of goes outside of a certain range, there's an internal process that needs to be implemented. So I don't. I think no matter what sort of metrics are sort of applied, I still think that's sort of a necessary steps that need to be put in place at the company.
Okay. Yeah, and there's, I'll finish this line of questioning here. I'm just trying to understand if we
Sure.
were to go with an alternative approach that you're suggesting, what in addition to what staff is recommending, we would need to do. So that might be something, and I guess final briefs could be suggested.
Okay.
I also wanted to just talk a little bit about the carrying costs, some of your discussion in your testimony, and I believe you're raising a concern that by taking this month-to-month approach that we are calculating a charge to customers if not enough revenue on a monthly basis is collected. Is that correct? And
That's correct, and I thought that's inconsistent with the language in the STRIDE statute.
okay, and as you look at it then on an annual basis, those calculations monthly would in fact end up in a carrying charge, against customers. Is that correct? Is that what you were suggesting? And
Yes, that's what my analysis showed. Yes.
okay, and then you were listening yesterday about if you just took the annual approach, and I think that's what you're maybe in a different testimony. The concern is it doesn't take into the time value of money concern. Do you have a response to that? Why, is that a correct assessment of the fault in what you're suggesting?
I heard that from company witness Wagner, and I think his example that he said is that if the company makes most of their investments later in the year, that the customers will be paying sort of upfront for a lot of investments that don't go into place later in the year. I don't think that's quite accurate because if you were to do it on an annual basis, the annual rate base is a 12-month average. So that average is going to take in. So if you have eight months of little investment and then like everything comes in September, that average rate base that's used to set for the annual amount is going to take into account those 8 months with little investments.
Okay, so you stand by the I guess the concern that there should never be a carrying charge applied against under collections.
That's correct, yes.
Monthly or annually.
Yes.
Okay, and are you aware? Is that something? Is WGL kind of an outlier in Maryland
Yeah,
as far as the way they approach these carrying?
Yeah, for the other two companies that for BG&E and Columbia, they do it on an annual basis. Yes.
Okay. And finally, I just wanted to ask, just project scope. You're suggesting that we may want to roll back a little bit the program, the project. from what is being proposed. After listening to the company yesterday, and do you still stand by I guess, scaling back of the program for the next cycle?
Right. Yeah, I stand by the recommendation, and I recognize that they're making efforts to change both maybe from an operational perspective, how they're managing these projects, and then their cost estimates. I still have concern about there is no track record that this is going to be successful. So I would like to see within for them to begin this smaller scope and show that they can actually complete this work on time before expanding the scope to what they proposed.
Okay, so you didn't hear anything yesterday that says they can. And you, I don't know if you know this, but our energy office is basically actively pushing for gas expansion in the state of Maryland. So it's possible that we, in the coming years, we'll have more and more Marylanders receiving gas service. So are there any concerns that you would represent from OPC that, if we're expanding gas in the state, that we're not going as quickly as we can to make sure the infrastructure is as up to date and safe as possible? And we heard yesterday that if we were to scale back at all, we could lose, I think I heard 7 years based on your recommendation, and I'm not sure I ever jotted down or caught what the staff, our commission staff might, the impact it might be on the overall program. I mean, do you represent any concerns by OPC that that is also a risk if we don't, encourage the company to go as quickly as they're proposing?
Right. I think that there's always concern. I mean, everybody's goal is to get rid of, to eventually get these leak-prone pipes out of the ground. I think the note I would say to the company saying that it's my proposal that is going to slow it down by 7 years is that my proposal is based off of what their current pace of replacement is. So I'm sort of matching with the replacement they've shown that they're capable of doing. So it's sort of until they prove otherwise, that's their pace of replacement is sort of my recommendation.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I appreciate your answers.
Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Mr. Larkin Connolly.
Good morning.
In your rebuttal testimony on pages 4 through 11, you discuss the concerns that you had regarding the leak rate analysis.
Commissioner Linton, are you referring to the revised?
I'm referring to Mr. Brendan Larkin Connolly's rebuttal testimony.
Rebuttal. Thank you.
And while we're talking about it, the rebuttal testimony filed by Mr. Clemenson, Staff Witness Clemenson, responded to your analysis of the leak-prone assets. So, since you're here, I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to what Mr. Clemenson said.
I don't have Mr. Clemenson's. Is there a specific section, part of his testimony that?
Yes, on page.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with a copy of the testimony?
Sure. You're asking me? It's on page 3 of his rebuttal testimony. He starts out on line 3 by saying, no, I do not agree with OPC witness Larkin Connolly's assessment of the company's leak rates, and goes from there.
I see that. Yes. Do you want me to can I take 1 minute to reread? Or is there a specific line that you want?
No, I was asking that you respond to it. It just, I guess, as a add-on to that, the company was asked about this section of testimony yesterday, and they agreed with witness Clemenson's analysis. And so, since your testimony is in direct contradiction, I wanted to get your response.
Sure. So I generally agree with the point made at the end, where that sort of any increase in leak rates should raise some concern. Somebody that it requires you to sort of look further into what's causing the leak rates. I'm not. I don't quite agree that these other the sort of scenarios that he presents here specifically address my concern that it's more the that there could have been some effect of the switch in between 2017 and 2018 of not bringing in new projects. So that was my main concern, is that because of a move to where in 2018 no new projects were added to the list, there could have been in 2017 some sort of higher risk projects that arose that didn't get added, that sort of would have been part of a 2018 project list that weren't then addressed in 2018. So it was my thought that that could be some contributing factor to the increase in leak rates in that year, and we don't quite know how much that could have contributed.
So as part of your analysis and the work you did as part of discovery to develop your testimony, specifically in your rebuttal, did you determine, did you have any thoughts on what was the source or the reasoning for the increase in leaks in the data that both you presented and the data that the commission staff presented, suggesting that there was an increase? It sounds as if you're suggesting that the reason why there was an increase is because of the manner in which the company moved forward with the replacements. And by manner, I mean scheduling. Is that the...
I think that could be... The point I'm trying to raise is that it could have been one of the factors. I mean, there's weather and sort of cold weather could cause higher breaks in mains if there's frost heaves. Mm-hmm. So there's a number of factors, or I agree with the discussion here that there could be just a deterioration in the condition of some of the assets that are on the system. That's also going to result in a higher leak rate. But if you look at the leak rates, they were as the company's first couple of years when it was implementing the plan and sort of on a developing project list on a year-by-year basis, the leak rates were relatively stable, and there is some you do see in the years when they sort of move away from doing developing these annual lists to focus on the sort of backlog of projects, there is an increase. So I just wanted to make the point that there is this we don't quite know whether that could have contributed to the leak rates. It's inconclusive. We don't know for certain, but it's just a point that I wanted to raise.
So did you have any concern that, excuse me, that there was that there's some other safety-related concern that we should have regarding the increase in leaks that's identified in your analysis and in the commission staff's analysis?
I'd have to see what the leak rates are going to be this year. It's you could have one year rise, and then if this year it sort of goes back down, I'd be less concerned. So I'd need to see more of a history of the increasing leak rates. I think if you remember back to the Baltimore BG&E case, they have those high pressure steel services where you see the leak rates and it goes up here and it just sort of accelerates over time. And the commission sort of granted a further acceleration of replacements for those assets because you sort of saw it wasn't up and down, it was just a straight up line. So those are sort of, that type of trajectory is one that I think you should be concerned of when you see multiple years of higher leak rates.
Okay. All right. I have one other question regarding some of the terminology that we've been using for the for Stride as a general matter. You listened to the testimony that was provided yesterday, at least most of it.
Yeah.
There was some discussion earlier regarding the concept of a project, a Stride plan, and as the company has referenced it, a Stride program, which extends multiple years beyond the 5 years of a plan. In your experience reviewing both other Stride programs in Maryland and in other places, or replacement programs in other places, have you seen language like that, or terminology like that, and what type of regulatory review should the Commission look at in terms of on an ongoing basis during the course of a plan and over the course of the program as a whole?
I think the way the company plan is set up is common throughout the industry. I think where you have a sort of, I guess maybe a master the master plan of that's how are we going to over 20 plus years, how are we going to replace all the pipes, and then within that those plans there's sort of the individual 5-year plans, and then within the 5-year plans there's the annual projects, and I think from the Commission's perspective, and what I did when I prepared my testimonies, I thought, well, at this point what we're discussing is a 5-year plan, so you need to sort of evaluate the company first on how successful were they in completing their previous 5-year plan, sort of an apples to apples comparison. But then at this time it's also worth trying to understand how did they do within the individual years that make up that 5-year plan. Does that sort of help, or is there?
No, that helps. That's the answer. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Does council have any questions for the witness based on the commissioner's
Thank you.
questions?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Cleaver, Commissioner Herman, always eagle-eyed, noted that Counsel for Washington Gas made reference to Mr. Larkin Connolly's first surrebuttal that has not been admitted into evidence. Would you like to mark that exhibit as OPC number 13, and we'll move that into evidence?
Sure, I could do that if the Commission would prefer that.
The reason I would recommend that is because Counsel for Washington Gas made specific line references. Okay.
Sure, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Larkin Connolly's first surrebuttal testimony is marked as OPC exhibit number 13 and moved into evidence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cleaver, do you have another witness to sponsor?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
Before we move up, Washington Gas would move the admission of WGL exhibit number 12. I realize it's the same attachment. The attachment is the same as one of the exhibits attached to Mr. Larkin Connolly's testimony, but we would like to call it out separately as our own exhibit.
Okay. Any objection?
No objection.
That exhibit is admitted. The witness may step down. Thank you for your testimony. At this point, why don't we take a brief 5-minute break, and after that, I would ask staff counsel if their first witness would be ready.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes at 11:20. Can the witness please rise?
I do.
Ms. Gruffalo.
Good morning, Mr. Cross.
Good morning.
Mr. Cross, do you have with you a document entitled Direct Testimony of Jason Cross, consisting of 20 pages of text, including a cover and table of contents, one exhibit, and that was pre-filed August 17th, 2018?
I do.
Do you have, was that document prepared by you or under your supervision?
It was.
And do you have any changes you'd like to make at this time?
I do. I have a minor change to correct a mathematical error. If you can turn to page 15. Starting at line 11, there's a number that says 16.7% overrun. That number should be 17.4. Following into line 12, again, instead of 16.7, that should be 17.4. If we track down, sorry, I'm getting that cold that everybody's rolling around with. If we get down to line 15, again, the 16.7 is 17.4. Moving on the same line to the figure that says 27.44 million, that number actually becomes 28.43, 28.43. Moving down to line 17, the figure that says 65.75 should actually be 68.54, 68.54. And then at the end of the same line, the number 459.46 should actually be 462.25, 462.25. That concludes the corrections.
Mr. Cross, if you were asked the questions contained in this document today, with the corrections you've just made, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
And do you adopt this document as your sworn testimony for the purposes of this case?
I do.
Your Honor, I would ask that Mr. Cross's direct testimony be marked as Staff Exhibit 1
So marked.
and admitted into evidence subject to cross-examination.
Seeing no objection, Staff Exhibit 1 is moved into evidence. Who would like... Are you ready to tender the witness?
The witness is available for cross-examination.
Who would like to begin? Mr. Cleaver, Mr. Kane, Mr. Dodge?
No cross-examination from the company.
Mr. Cleaver?
OPC has no questions for Mr. Cross.
Do the commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Herman.
Good morning, Mr. Cross. The company argues that the staff plan is going to cost more and take longer to finish the replacement of these assets. And that's probably true because you're doing less, you're doing fewer within this 5-year plan than the company proposes to accomplish. So does that raise concerns for the staff that we would be not completing the replacement as soon as we might otherwise?
While I'm not necessarily the engineering witness, I think that the balance that we need to strike here is definitely between getting the job done. And again, remembering that STRIDE is a program that is statutorily enabled. However, the company still has the ability to do work outside of STRIDE. It can do it the old-fashioned way, which is you do the work, and then you come in for the rate case, and you get that rolled into rate base. From a planning perspective, we would like to see that balance struck. And given the fact that the STRIDE 1 I believe witness Clemenson predicated his recommendations on, a factor of average pace from stride one. So regardless if we give the company the complete project estimate that they're asking for, the plan estimate they're asking for in this case, if they cannot complete that at the rate that they propose, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. Mr. Clemenson predicated his recommendation on the average pace from stride one. Stride two, we still have a hypothetical in front of us. I hope that the company has, improved its processes both from a planning standpoint and estimate standpoint, but they do remain hypothetical at this juncture.
Okay, thank you. And which of the staff witnesses, and perhaps it's you, should I ask about the contingency factor and the inflation factor?
Insofar as I can address some of your issues, I will try to do so. I believe witness Clemenson was actually the witness that testified specifically to that.
Mm-hmm.
It also may roll into accounting, but
okay. So, what is the staff position on the 20% contingency factor?
at this juncture, we look at the costs. We do look at the actual costs, and so when we are presented with a project list, we're looking at the actual costs and the revenues that we need to recover from that, the revenue requirement that stems off of that. So insofar as when we look at the project lists, we believe that the estimates and the project list should line out. So again, we're really more focused on the revenue aspect of that, and it is the actual costs that we're concerned with.
So you're saying that staff doesn't support a contingency factor on those estimates?
We didn't really address that issue in testimony. However, in light of the cross-examination and other areas that have been brought up here, I don't know that staff would be behind the 20% contingency factor. Again, looking at the way that we process these in terms of the year-to-year project list, we do look at the actuals. But in toto, no.
Okay. And inflation?
We didn't. To my knowledge, I personally did not address the inflation issue.
Okay.
I really can't speak to that.
All right. I'll ask the next witness, and we'll go down from there. Okay. So, Mr. Hawkes revised provided some revised numbers yesterday. Mm-hmm. Were you here when he did that?
I was.
Okay. And has staff had a chance to look at those and address whether they agree with with his revised exhibit? And I'm sure I could find it. Let's see. It's on page 19 of his rebuttal testimony. Mm-hmm. He, revised all those numbers, and I believe, Mr. Dodge, you were going to refile that page with the corrected numbers.
Yes, Your Honor. In fact, we're going to file all the pages with the corrected numbers
Okay.
with the Commission Secretary and the Court Reporter.
Thank you. So, should I ask Mr. Clemenson about that, or?
Yes, I believe that would actually be appropriate for witness Clemenson.
Okay.
We briefly discussed a few of the elements of that this morning, but I believe witness Clemenson is in a better position to address that.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Richard?
I don't really have many questions beyond what Commissioner Herman just asked. I did want to get kind of a similar question, though. Does staff have a position or a response, I guess, to OPC on the carrying cost issue?
We believe that we've been working with the other companies to address this issue. We believe that it is something that we would like to discuss with the company, possibly outside of the rate case, in order to make sure that if there's a tariff, because oftentimes this is captured in the tariff language. We do believe that this is something that we would like to align all the companies, all of our STRIDE eligible companies, we'd like to align the practices across that spectrum. So we would look to, if we do not address this in this case, then we would like to take the opportunity to discuss this with the company.
Okay, great. That was kind of the other question. I think Mr. Bonikowski was going to talk a little bit about the discussions they're having with the other companies, and so this could be done through the tariffs or the GSP 32 revisions. Is that what you're
I believe that that gives us an opportunity to have the dialogue and to address any tariff concerns that might come out of that.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Does counsel wish to examine the witness based on any of these responses?
However tempting, no, Your Honor.
No, no.
Thank you. Mr. Cross, you got off easy this afternoon. You are excused. Staff counsel,
Thank
please
you.
call your next witness.
Staff calls John Clemenson.
Do you swear and affirm under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in the matter defending is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Clemenson.
Good morning. For a little while longer.
Do you have with you a document entitled Direct Testimony and Exhibits of John J. Clemenson, pre-filed August 17, 2018, consisting of a cover page, table of contents, 23 pages of text, 1 exhibit, and 5 data responses?
Yes, I do.
Was this document prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes, it was.
Do you have any changes you would like to make to this document at this time?
No.
And let me also ask you about a second document. This document is entitled The Surrebuttal Testimony of John J. Clemenson, filed September 17th, consisting of a cover page, table of contents, and 4 pages of text.
Yes.
Was that also prepared by you under your supervision?
Yes.
And do you have any changes you'd like to make to that document at this
No.
time? Your Honor, I'd like to ask that Mr. Clemenson's direct testimony be marked as Staff Exhibit 2, and that his surrebuttal be marked as Staff Exhibit 3.
So marked?
If you were asked these questions today, Mr. Clemenson, would your answers be the same?
Yes, it would.
And that's true for your direct and your surrebuttal.
Yes.
And do you adopt the testimony, your direct testimony and surrebuttal testimony as your sworn testimony for the purposes of this case?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would like to ask that Staff Exhibit 2 and 3 be admitted into evidence.
Seeing no objection, Staff Exhibits 2 and 3 are accepted into evidence.
The witness is available for
Thank you.
cross-examination.
Who would like to begin?
I'm happy to begin, Your Honor.
Mr. Dodge.
Good morning, Mr. Clemenson.
Good morning.
Could you please turn to page 22 of your direct testimony?
Go ahead.
Beginning at line 8, you start to describe a set of new performance metrics that staff is proposing for Stride 2. Is that correct?
Correct.
And those performance metrics are specifically called out on lines 18 to 28.
That is correct.
Can you tell us a bit more about these performance metrics?
Basically, the performance metrics are utilized in project management as a way of tracking the progress of a project or a group of projects from the start. They can be used to track the physical progress of how the projects are occurring or getting completed, and they also have the ability to be used to track the dollar amounts for those projects.
Thank you. I'm a lawyer, not a program manager. Would it be fair to say that these metrics are standard metrics for the kinds of project management issues that staff has identified?
Yes, these metrics are used in the industry.
Thank you. Is it your proposal that these metrics go into effect on January 1st, 2019, when Stride 2 goes into effect?
Not the exact date. What I envision is would have to occur is that if we were so ordered to do so is that staff and the company would have to get together and sit down and discuss these metrics a little further to ensure that the manner in which the company collects and retains data will actually fit these. We may have to do some tweaking and things of that nature, but it would be my intent that once we came to that agreement that they would be provided for at a minimum in the reconciliation and if maybe not also in the semi-annual report.
So these would be additive, in all likelihood, additive to the reporting that the company does now, or reslicing the data that the company provides now?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if Baltimore Gas and Electric and Columbia Gas of Maryland, have the staff or the commission implemented these performance metrics for them in their Stride 2 plans or programs?
I know we have done it for for BG&Es, and we have met with them to start the process of getting preparing what the information would look like. We haven't not received any data yet. We're still working through what can we agree on what the presentation is going to be.
And last question, beyond the Stride utilities, the three companies that I've referenced, are these metrics used by other utilities in Maryland? And here I'm just trying to get a touchstone for experience that staff, OPC, and the company could look to understand the nature of these metrics.
I am not aware of any of the other companies currently.
That's all I have. Thank you, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Staff has no redirect.
Mr. Cleaver?
No questions, Your Honor.
Do the commissioners have questions? Commissioner Herman?
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, I'll start with the question I asked Mr. Cross, and he punted to you. I believe we used to say that meant he had to buy you lunch. So, you can... Oh, sorry. So you can, I'll check up later and see how that worked out. Okay, so on page 19 of Mr. Hawkes' testimony, rebuttal testimony, he revised a lot of numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you had had an opportunity to review that and see if you had concerns or if you were in agreement with that, those revisions.
As far as the unit numbers, no, I have no issues with those. We looked at them. Again, I mean, the biggest difference that we have is in the total services. We were down in 8,000 and change.
Mm-hmm.
After looking at that, we determined that what that number represents was the total number of services from all of Project 1. We did not, inadvertently forgot to include the services for Projects 2, 3, and 4 as we estimated 80 miles, but we weren't sure, as to how dense the amount of services were going to be on there.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to look at the 80 miles, the roughly 77 miles that we predicted, that roughly turns out to be about 65% of the projected main that the company wanted. So going back and looking at the services that they provided in their original application for this, and using that 65% number, it comes in line with Mr. Yakis's update. So yes, we have no issue.
14,631 on total services.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks. That's helpful. So I believe I read in your testimony that when you were determining what you thought was the appropriate replacement rate, you compared 2014 through 17 and then 2017 and took the highest number. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So I know that I believe we've heard that 2018 was mostly sort of a year where they were catching up from prior years. Was that also the case for 17?
There were a few projects in there that were carryover from other years, but no, they had, I think, roughly 172 projects in that 2017 list, if I'm not mistaken.
Did you account when you were determining the replacement rate that Washington Gas had in fact made, because I believe you said that you agreed that they had made some improvements in their estimation and pricing and that sort of thing. Did you account for those improvements when you developed your replacement rate?
No, the rates were basically strictly on the numbers as far as what they got done. When I estimated it was roughly at 34.9%. That was basically looking at each year individually and for how many projects they got done in that year, the year they were proposed.
So why should we look at the individual years when this is a 5-year plan? You know, there's always going to be a ramp up and a ramp down. So why is it appropriate to look at them in the years individually versus overall?
Well, it's a double-edged sword, because when this was first starting out, everybody was really looking and harping on what was getting done on a yearly basis. And that was one of the measuring sticks that we were looking at. Now, being it said that some projects do carry over from year to year, and not everything starts on January 1. And at the time we were writing the testimony, that's the data that we had, looking at that on that yearly basis. Now, they've indicated they're in the mid to high 80s as far as their completion rates now, which is a good thing. And I'm not trying to kind of ignore that number. It's just that I presented a number just to kind of show you what they were doing on a yearly basis. Right.
Well, given the additional information that they're 80 to 90% complete as a plan, for over the 5-year period, do you think the replacement rate should be adjusted upward because they in fact have come much closer than 34.9%?
I would think in this case, everybody was on, well, I won't say for everybody, I'll talk to myself. We were under the impression that each year would be a unique list, and that they were going to try and get those done. Like I said, not everything gets started in a year and all that nature. So, if going forward, if they determine that they're going to manage the program in the same manner as a whole, and use the last year to kind of clean things up, then yes, the 89% would be where you would want to look at. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking on a yearly basis, then I would think, we should hold them to a little more of a standard as far as, what they get done.
Right. So I think I heard you say earlier that your numbers are about 65% of what Washington Gas proposed?
Correct. When the averages versus the 2017 number, that's okay. For mileage, that's where it turned out to be.
65%. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Mr. Hawkes says that your proposal is not an acceleration and is constructively negative. And that's on, I think, page 19 of his testimony, if you want to look at that. So, do you have a reaction to that? I mean, is your proposal an acceleration?
Well, you would have to take into acceleration of what? Over stride 1? No. Is it an acceleration overall? Yes, because stride 1 was an acceleration, and if this is, what they averaged then, you're still at an accelerated pace prior to stride. Mm-hmm. So, in that regards. Okay. I mean, it's not my intent to hold this pace throughout the whole stride until everything's done. Mm-hmm. So, I believe if they can show that they can get it done and a little more, then why not allow them to collect on the surcharge? Okay. And I noted that OPC suggested that transmission project number 5, which is the inspection, they raised some concerns with that didn't fit within the stride definition because it's an inspection and not a replacement. But that you included stride. You included the 5th program in your proposal. So do you have a concern with the fact that it's an inspection as opposed to a replacement? Well, if I'm not mistaken, the law talks about safety and reliability. It's two of the components. It's like, I kind of relate it to replacing leak-prone pipe. You can replace cast iron, but that section of cast iron may have never ever leaked, but you're still going to take it out before it leaks. So by doing that, you're potentially eliminating leaks, is eliminating the release of the gases. Well, with the inline inspection, the launcher and the receiver, by allowing them to do that, they are able to run the tool through the line and determine the condition of the line. Mm-hmm. And if they find anything, they have the ability to go ahead and fix it before it does leak. In a sense, doing the same thing as replacing the pipe that hasn't leaked, but it has that material has a history of leaking. Right. So, I consider it a safety and reliability. Okay, I believe you were here a little while ago when Mr. Larkin Connolly was testifying.
And he suggested that the increased leak rate may have something to do with the fact that Washington Gas stopped doing new projects and was focusing on finishing up the projects that hadn't been completed yet. Do you have a reaction to that, being an engineer?
I would say if you saw the leak rates at the end of this year and maybe possibly going forward, you could kind of say that, yeah, the change up for 2018 could be a potential. But if you're looking for leak rates for 2017 and you make the change in 2018, how does that affect the leak rates in the prior year?
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not ruling out, that being a potential contributor going down the road, but I wouldn't base that on the leak rates of the past.
Okay. And I asked Mr. Cross about the contingency factor and the inflation rate. So he said that staff, what I heard was that staff was not supportive of the contingency factor. Do I have that correct?
That is what he said, yes.
Okay. And with respect to the inflation, the 3% inflation rate, does staff have a position on that?
I did not take one on that part, no, on the inflation rate.
Okay. Do you know if the other companies have inflation rates built into their stride estimates?
If I'm not mistaken, yes, they do take into account inflation rates going forward.
They do?
Yes.
Okay. And contingencies, do you know if they include contingencies in there?
I do not remember if anybody else directly mentioned a contingency factor, no.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Clemenson, about some things that I kind of been asking other witnesses about with regard to the low pressure system, with your engineering hat on. So when we have an incident in Maryland, our engineering division is wonderful in providing the commissioners updates, and we're fairly on top of that stuff. And I think it was Floral Gardens where we had the tragic deaths, loss of life, 7, I believe, if memory serves me correctly. And you remember how exercised our agency was with regard to immediate reaction and follow-up.
Yes.
And you can probably only imagine what the folks in Massachusetts were reacting to last week with regard to multiple explosions in multiple communities and loss of life and a couple dozen people injured. And so you can imagine what we would be reacting to here at our commission. And when I questioned, I believe, Mr. Stabler, the Senior Vice President in charge of utility operations from the company, I asked him about I think it was him, I could be wrong on that, but the danger of low pressure system overpressurizations. Now, this incident that happened in Massachusetts, we don't know what caused it yet. NTSB will take, as you know, 12 to 24 months to evaluate that. They're very methodical. But they've already stipulated to, at least according to press accounts, that it was an overpressurization. There's some speculation that it was a sensor that detected an underpressurization in the low pressure system and that valves were open to compensate for that, whether or not that was an automatic response, remote response, or that was a manual response and operator error. All that will come out in the long-term investigation. We don't know that. But I think that from an engineering standpoint, we have to acknowledge there's a significant safety vulnerability to the overpressurizing these low pressure systems. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. But it doesn't seem to me that our stride system even acknowledges that. Now, it does kind of tangentially, because the company talks about low pressure systems, but they talk about it in terms of reliability, water intrusion. They'll talk about it in terms of its inherent safety, and to me that trumps reliability, because if you have a loss of life, well, that's irreplaceable. You can deal with a reliability problem and compensate in other ways, but you can't restore the life once it's lost. So the inherent public safety issue, to me, rises that to the top of the list in terms of where we want to prioritize our efforts. and yet we don't seem to do that with these low-pressure systems. Now, maybe that's a aha moment as a result of what happened in Massachusetts, but do we have the ability to respond to that in our stride planning and our engineering thoughts on stride systems?
The only way I think that you would be able to alleviate the low pressure and the potential issues that are with it is you would have to actually get rid of it and just increase the pressures across the system. And as part of Stride, the companies have indicated that's a primary goal because, you know, besides the safety issue you talk about now, there is also the operational issues that they're trying to avoid with low pressure.
Let me suggest to you that it's not a primary goal, and that's my point in this line of questioning, that it's a secondary goal, that it gets replaced when one of the other primary goals, the bare steel or the unprotected wrap steel or protected wrap steel or the copper services or the vintage mechanically coupled systems get replaced and it's feasible. So it's only when one of the other classes kick in and only when it's feasible. So it's not a priority. That company in Massachusetts, they withdrew their rate case. They had a settlement agreement. They withdrew it. The PSC there approved that withdrawal the very next day, yesterday. They're making extraordinary commitments immediately to say we're going to replace all 48 miles of this stuff in this area where we had the problem. We have significant mileage of this stuff in our system. So, but I would submit to you that it's not a priority. It's a secondary consideration. Only after one of the other primary considerations kick in, and only after it's determined to be feasible. Can you comment on that thought? Am I wrong on that?
No, none of the companies have come in and said that, hey, we want to get rid of, want to get rid of low pressure based on the inherent risk from being overpressurized. No, that has never been anybody's main driver. You're correct in that statement.
How do we shift to that? How do we be nimble enough to shift, or any other thing that may become apparent in our stride planning? Say these new services we're putting in, super plastic services, and we find an inherent flaw in some part of the piece, some gasket, something goes bad quicker than we anticipated, or something.
Unfortunately, I hope to say it's not like a traffic light. You have to have somebody in an accident before you usually get a traffic light, and hopefully, you know, it's not the way you want an agenda to get pushed or a certain, you know, Massachusetts is probably going to become a big driving factor in that these companies are going to have to sit down and look at, you know, their DEMP plans and things of that nature as a cause.
We don't know what we don't know, and I understand that. And oftentimes you do have to have a history of failure before you can take corrective action. I understand that too. But are our processes built to accommodate that nimbleness, that ability to change from this set of priorities that we had in 2018 to this set of priorities that we absolutely know we now need in 2019? Do we have that ability to shift?
I would say, yeah, the processes aren't built in stone. You know, most of these, you know, the plans and processes are living, breathing, to be, you know, like a living, breathing thing. You know, changes when they need to change and adapts. So it can be done with these companies.
And I trust that engineering is following the developments and over very, very closely. Right?
Yes. Been in touch with the company, you know, and the state here also.
I appreciate you indulging me in this discussion, and it's
no problem.
Just kind of something that I think casts a big shadow over where we think we're going with this stuff. So, okay, thank you, Mr. Clements, I appreciate it.
I don't really have any additional questions. I thought those were pretty good. Maybe just ask a broader question. I know you have an alternative stride proposal, but just after you've listened to the company, and I was particularly interested in the testimony of Mr. Walsh yesterday, and talking about the steady state analysis and different ways to look at what the company has accomplished in the Stride 1. Do you see as a probability of some sort that the company could achieve what they are suggesting, what they're recommending for their Stride 2, or do you find that it's just outside of the realm of probability as far as as we look at trying to make the assessment of do we just take what the company's offering, or should we go with an alternative approach?
If you're talking about like manpower to get the work done, I believe there is an ability for the company to do that. There's nothing stopping the company from going in accelerating the replacement rate at what they want. It's just, well, kind of what it comes down to is this is what we're willing to let them recover in cost under stride. They can go out and, if they want to do, we said like 65%. If they want to do the other 35% and come back in traditional rate making, there's nothing stopping them from doing that. It's just that they have to wait to get the payback in a sense.
Right, I understand that, but the legislature did set a cap of $2.
Correct.
And so, and even the plan, the company is likely to exceed that. Obviously, the cap stays in place. But should we, take the legislature and at its word and say, hey, we should as quickly as possible get this program done, and you can go up to $2, and so allow the company to get to that pace as quickly as possible. In other words, I think we all know that they can do this and go through the regular process, but the legislature has given us this incentive program to encourage them to move quicker. So.
I do not recall in any of the rebuttal testimony that I read that anybody showing what the actual rates would be based on the revision. So it's kind of hard to say, are they already at that $2 mark? I mean, if you're basing it on past history, they were pretty much close to that mark before. So, I mean, I'd hate to be the one that says slow it down and something go wrong. Okay, but
if I'm understanding, and I'm looking at the chart that staff put out, I mean, the alternative approach, it'll take longer to get to that $2 cap. Is that correct?
In theory, yeah. If they're not already there, yes.
So that means we're not, again, utilizing this program, the STRIDE program, to its maximum effect if we don't allow the company to move at the pace it is recommending. So.
As you're describing, yes, I would agree with that. We're not.
Okay, so you stand by your alternative, but you think if there is, after listening to the company, it's within the realm of possibility again that they could achieve what they're proposing for their STRIDE 2.
Yes, I actually hope they do in the long run. But we have to go on history. I don't have a glass ball in front of me.
I understand. No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon.
Yep.
Mr. Clemenson. Had to check to make sure. On page 18 and 19 of your direct testimony, you lay out on an annual basis, excuse me, the STRIDE project list for the company. You also, excuse me, you also note the number of projects that the company has completed and how many remain at the end of the year. What's staff's expectation as to what happens to those projects that were not completed in the year, during the course of the year?
Are we talking about what may potentially be left over in 2018, or just kind of thinking forward, going ahead?
Both ways.
I'm hoping the company's correct that they will get them done, but their past history has shown that they will continue to push those projects until they get them complete. Going forward, I'd probably imagine that when they look at estimating start and stop dates, that will probably be scrutinized a little more and saying what is realistic based on what we've seen in our history. You just don't want to say everything starts on January and ends in December, because again, you're not starting everything on January 1. There's typically a slow period in the beginning of the year. Come into summer, you pick the pace up. And hopefully by the fall, you're starting to wrap a lot of things up. But again, things do take time to get done.
So the projects that are listed, just looking at the bullet 4 on page 19, we have, according to your testimony, there are 34 projects that were deferred for later work. If there were a bullet 5 for 2018, would those projects be included there, or would they have, where would they be at that point?
Well, the deferral takes into account projects that have moratoriums, which means they have to be really put on the shelf because they're waiting for payment, moratoriums to lift. Those can take up to 5 years, things of that nature. And then the rest of them, I would assume, yes, they get put onto a list sooner, because if they were already prioritized to be done, they should get on the list as soon as possible to stay with the thinking of that we want to get the worst of the worst out.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Any additional examination of this witness?
Your Honor, if I may, not a question for Mr. Clemenson, but a representation and an assurance on behalf of Washington Gas in response to Commissioner O'Donnell's very well expressed concerns about what happened in Massachusetts, and to amplify what I think our witness Stabler mentioned in your colloquy with him, whether it is in the context of a formal case like Stride 2 or informal discussions with the Commission and its staff, we stand ready to address those concerns. We're not going to hew to written words on a piece of paper or in Comar or in a statute. We understand and share your concerns, and we are going to address those concerns.
Seeing no other examination, the witness is excused. Thank you. Ms. Garofalo, please call your next witness.
Staff calls
Mr. Patterson.
Patterson, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Patterson.
Good afternoon.
Do you have before you a document entitled The Direct Testimony of Felix L. Patterson, dated August 17, 2018, consisting of 6 pages and attachments?
Yes, I do.
Was this document created by you or under your supervision?
Yes, it was.
Do you have any changes or corrections to this document?
No, I do not.
Does this document constitute your testimony in this proceeding?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, I'd like to mark this as Staff Exhibit Number 4.
So marked.
And I'd also like to move it into the administrative record.
Seeing no objection, Staff Exhibit Number 4 is accepted into evidence.
Thank you. Staff's witness is available for cross-examination.
Thank you. Mr. Cleaver.
No questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Kane or Mr. Dodge?
No questions, Your Honor.
Do the commissioners have questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Patterson.
Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Dean, please call your next witness.
Staff would like to call Mr. Bonikowski.
Do you swear and affirm under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Bonikowski, could you state your position with the Commission?
I am a regulatory economist 2 within the Commission's Energy Analysis and Planning Division.
Thank you. Do you have before you a document entitled The Direct Testimony of Matthew J. Bonikowski, dated August 17, 2018, consisting of 19 pages of testimony?
Yes, I do.
Was this document created by you or under your supervision?
It was?
Do you have any changes or corrections to this document?
No.
Your Honor, I'd like to mark this as Staff Exhibit Number 5.
So marked.
Mr. Bonikowski, do you have a second document entitled the Surrebuttal Testimony of Matthew J. Bonikowski, dated September 17, 2018, consisting of 2 pages?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any changes or corrections to this document?
No, I do not.
And was this document also created by you or under your supervision?
It was.
Thank you. Your Honor, I'd like to mark this document as Staff Exhibit Number 6.
So marked.
Your Honor, I'd like to move Staff Exhibits Number 5 and 6 into the administrative record.
Seeing no objections, staff exhibits number 5 and 6 are moved into evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Bonikowski, do these two exhibits constitute your testimony in this proceeding?
Yes, they do.
Thank you. Your Honor, the staff witness is available for cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver.
No questions, Your Honor.
Counsel for Washington Gas, Mr. Kane.
No question.
Question. Commissioners. Commissioner Herman.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bonikowski.
Good
How are
afternoon.
you? So, I note in your direct testimony that you provide the surcharges for the staff proposal, along with the Washington Gas proposal and the differences, right? So, based on Mr. Hawkes's changes to the alternative plan, I'm going to guess, because the total amount is almost the same, that those surcharges would be the same. You wouldn't have any changes to
That's
those?
my understanding, yes.
Okay, just wanted to confirm that. Thanks. And the staff's position is, with respect to the reconciliation issue, that we should wait and talk to all of the utilities and have it be uniform across all three Stride companies. Is that right?
Yes, in general, staff's position is that on any reconciliation or general tariff matters, we would like to handle those outside of this case to ensure consistency across the three Stride eligible utilities.
And if the commission were to agree with that position, what's the time frame for getting that done?
I don't know that I have anything specific. I wouldn't imagine it would take us particularly long. I know we've already had discussions with BGE and I believe with Columbia on these matters, so I think the ball has already started rolling and we have some basis. I don't know that I'd be able to give a specific time frame, but I mean, we're not talking about years to develop this.
I should hope not, but hopefully nothing takes years.
No.
Is it your understanding that BGE and Columbia do something different than Washington Gas with respect to the reconciliation?
I'm honestly not sure at this point in time. It's not something that I specifically looked into prior to this.
And if the commission were to agree with the staff and order it that these changes, if the commission were to say, look at this and make sure there is no interest on under collection. I think that's correct, under collection. And the commission wanted that done before Stride 2 took effect. Do you think you could accomplish that?
I believe that would be possible, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Those were my questions. Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bonikowski, I wanted to ask you about the rate cap analysis for residential heating and cooling. Am I correct that the company's plan as submitted hits the $2 cap in 2021?
Yes, it does.
And that the staff's alternative plan wouldn't hit the cap until 2022?
That's
Is that right? Okay. I just wanted to clarify that and make sure I understood how that works. Thank you.
Yep.
Does council have any questions based on Commissioner Herman or Commissioner O'Donnell's questioning?
No, Your Honor.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Bonikowski, you are excused. Thank you. Any final matters to be brought? Any additional witnesses, Mr. Dean?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any additional matters to be brought before the commission before concluding this hearing?
None from us, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. What's left is for briefing. We have a briefing schedule that was previously noticed. Initial briefs shall be filed by October 23rd. Reply briefs by November 2nd. Please consult Comar Title 20, Subtitle 7 for specifications regarding the format and content of your briefs. Seeing no other business, this hearing is adjourned.